Hey everybody, this is Jason Bosch, and I am here with my friend Leo Saraceno. And when was this? Several months ago, we did this video. I guess it was 2 months ago on natural assets, sovereign nature, and interspecies games. We did this with Allison and Leo. You had to leave. We got a good couple of hours into it, I think, but then you had some other plans or something. You had to take off. But we had some other content that we wanted to kind of cover. And so this is kind of a follow up to that. So Leo, how you doing?
I'm good. Pretty excited. I'd say also just coming to mind, like I'd say it's also a follow up to like those talks that we did involving Oak Ridge National Laboratories and um, radioisotope stuff, and that's kind of for me. That's where all that really, all this really came from is that research, and it ties in like quite directly.
Yeah, totally.
Yes,
And
thing.
there's a lot of
Yeah,
layers to this that are all interconnected. There's the parametric insurance. There's the tokenized natural asset class. There's a lot of different layers, and then getting into the radio uh, eugenics piece of it. Um, yeah, so I think
yeah. It's been almost like a couple of years, or like a year and a half, or maybe just a year. That it's kind of just been this like this one like fairly specific thing, and all those different layers that I've been looking at too, and especially like when you get into it. But it's all a lot about it's satellites, and really intense technologies around being able to get all this data for all these different sorts of ideas about ecology and stuff. So
yeah,
there's
and
a
I know
lot in just
I know a lot of people that have been kind of following the work. Have had a kind of a challenge. I had a challenge with it, and which I totally understand because there's a lot of ground to cover, and it's sometimes it's hard to keep track of all the different layers of it. And I would just say like if the more time you spend on it, the more it starts to kind of you start to see kind of outlines, and then you start to see kind of details that maybe you didn't see before, and it starts to make sense. But I think one of the challenge too is the framing that people have around um, democracy and political structures and economic structures. This um, it still pulls from that, but it's also something very very different and very new too. So yeah, we'll try to like go through this. And I thought we would start with this article. Pat Rawson, he is. Let me see if I can find him here. Pat Rawson is the co-founder of Curve Labs. He's out of Berlin, Germany. And do you want to say just something about Curve Labs and Pat Rawson, Leo?
sure. Yeah, they so Curve Labs is like a kind of development, like a Web3 development company that works on different like blockchain based projects, and they've done some with like EU funding and that sort of thing. I'd say like what I'm most familiar with is their work on a project called Collectivo, which is based in Curacao, which I believe is in the Caribbean, but I might be wrong on that actually. But which is this like blockchain based platform built on Celo that's all about um, basically, it's hard to say in few words, but creating a blockchain based system for people in a local area to profit off of taking care of the environment through sort of collecting data on things contributing to like the basic functions that like the natural world provides to like let us live. And then
Yeah.
so like the most and then the way that it's most financial, like kind of the carbon credit thing is like the big thing that people talk about a lot. And either like that's how they're going to control us, or that's like this is going to save the world or whatever. And it's like that's sort of like where the most money, and there's actually like markets, like liquid markets of trading carbon credits, and it's like a fairly developed thing that has been around for a while. And that's a whole like thing. But then they're kind of these sorts of projects like Collectivo will often like utilize carbon credits or that part of that in order to create like a monetary reward for people engaging in these systems. But their vision and like what they're moving towards a um, much broader financialization of nature through obtaining digital information. So instead of just carbon, they want to have a much wider array of like metrics and other sorts of indicators for things that could generate like a ecological credit versus just like a carbon credit.
Yeah,
And then it's all
go ahead.
yeah. And then like on top of that, since it's like it's cybernetics, it's a digital system. So to like kind of build and manage all of that, there's this whole like governance question on like how decisions are made in the platform, who gets to put data into it, how that data is verified or not, and then just like all sorts of the kind of like procedural things that are controlled would be controlled by DAOs or basically entities given specific designations within the software in order to fulfill specific roles. And then so that's where these sorts of systems are like a larger working on a larger thing than just kind of what it sounds like at first.
Yeah, and the selling point is that we have all these ecological and environmental problems, and that are caused by capitalism and markets, and the way to address them is more capitalism and markets. So what it's trying to do is supposedly trying to incentivize behaviors, right? Through, offering up tokens, for, or money, like, I mean, essentially tokens are, money, and they're trying to be, new forms of money, but not, but like people talk about programmable money. Oh, the World Bank, or I'm sorry, so people talk about like programmable money in terms of like the central bank. So the Bank of International Settlements or the Federal Reserve is going to program money, but this is a private type of programmed money where you get tokens for certain types of behavior, environmental behaviors. But the claims of it being environmental, I think, are dubious, as we'll get into, in terms of the technology involved, and and then you have all these layers of like gambling, right? Gambling on different outcomes, which is interesting. I don't know why. It's interesting because it seems like it's merging the capitalist mentality and the kind of a gambling mindset with people that want to do good for the environment, and it seems to me like those things are kind of incompatible, right?
Yeah, I mean it's weird. I mean it's kind of, to me it seems like they're trying to build a sort of controlled capitalism where you can gamble as much as you want within the confines defined by the smart contracts and the sort of algorithms defining the type of behavior that's allowed in the system. But like within that, there's a lot of financialization and gamification, which is, kind of the basic, like what makes blockchain work is that kind of like gamble, financialization and economic game theory. So it's, yeah.
So I was trying to find like a graphic here that might, I thought would be start explaining what a bonding curve is, because a lot of this has to do with bonding curves.
It's basically a way of doing automated trading and of token generation based on its price and supply, like kind of a way of making like an automated market for a digital asset, so that there's predefined things that happen when the price goes up or down, and those predefined things like adjusting this is adjusting the supply of the token and automated buying or selling of it. And then so the like curve itself of the bonding curve, I'm pretty sure is the function defining the price of a token with the supply of a token, um, so that a certain amount of supply of a token exists at a specific price, and that's like defined within the token itself. So it's a way of having creating funding mechanisms for projects and ideas that are not subject to just like wild volatility of the crypto market in general, and that can have a more like predefined role. Um, but it's yeah, and then it's also used for more like just advanced financial applications in like crypto exchanges and that sort of thing. But
Well, the
it's
idea
not,
of like,
yeah.
go ahead.
Mhm. No, you go.
It's interesting because it's like the idea of like something happens over here and it automatically triggers something over here is kind of the way I understand it. So I thought we'd start out with like, I thought that maybe I'd just start by going through this article and then we can chat about it.
Yeah.
And then I've got a bunch of clips as well that we can go through. So so this article it came out on June 1st, 2020. It's written by Pat Rawson, who's the co-founder of Curve Labs. And it's cryptospheric ecotechnics, DAOs and the global economic order. And DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations, something you should all know if you don't know. So a lot of these things, there's a lot of terms that people aren't familiar with. And it's really important to learn these terms because you're going to be kind of in the dark. That's my frustration with a lot of people that are challenging like the World Economic Forum or a lot of these things. They have a really basic understanding of things and they don't actually understand most of the key components of the system that's being built. So, I just encourage you. So if there's something you don't understand, take some time and look it up and learn what that is, because these are the new systems that are being advanced. So I'm going to move in a little bit closer so I can read it. And then feel free to like stop me anytime if there's something you want to say, Leo. The prosperity of human foams. That's an interesting. I never got that. The prosperity of human foams depends on global macro structures of co-immunization. Members of these structures are responsible collaborators for the setup of a global architecture of co-immunity. So it's interesting. They're framing it and they show this thing, which is kind of reminds me of like a sponge, like something, like a sea sponge. I don't know what that is, but what I mean?
That's a lichen.
Is it a lichen?
I feel like they do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Because lichen are these like complex, it's like fungi encasing algae or like sort of photosynthetic bacteria in this like kind of really like pretty complex like mutualistic association where they grow together. So it's like often it's like probably why he would use that image for.
Yeah, and the idea of like kind of connecting this to a lot of the mentality that people have. This came out in 2020, so we all know what was getting started in 2020, but like kind of speaking about this in terms of immunization and co-immunity is interesting. We began our exploration in the first part by describing the global economic topology, a mosaic of states, monetary authorities, and transnational corporations, together composing a core periphery network. An exploited dynamic was identified. So again, they're talking about like the problem with the current system is there's the exploiters and the exploiting, and that's true. You know, a lot of the language you hear from these people, they are talking about real problems that do exist. So and then with the core capital exploiting the environment and global labor, which is true, all labor in the global south and unskilled labor in the OECD bloc. Within neoliberalism's polycentric intermingling state, monetary and corporate networks, we analyze the ecological niche wherein a cryptosphere, the aggregation of all crypto network institutions, could take hold. We ended the first part by reimagining, so I didn't read the first part here, but by reimagining economic import substitution strategy, ISI. And so that's something we'll have to go back and kind of maybe talk about later. But speculating overall, these new crypto institutions might rebalance the global economic system by stabilizing the periphery. And I've heard a lot about like the periphery too. Like there's a talk that I actually haven't gone through, but like about Europe. You know, reorganizing Europe from the periphery. It was a talk that I actually downloaded, but I haven't actually watched yet. But that idea of the periphery is interesting. Crypto networks must now confront the same economic new words, people, new words, economic challenges that their real-world institutional counterparts encounter. Recall our anthropotechnogenic, I can do this, imperative in the first part, where humanity assumes its already established role as planetary steward. And so this idea that we are planetary stewards, there's an interesting idea here, like the approach of we need to save the planet versus a do no harm kind of approach. And I'm kind of more lean, you know, obviously there's things if there's things we can do to make things better, but so often that we do more harm in the even if it is a genuine, sincere effort to do good, there's a lot of harm that's done in the process. And it also doesn't address the core problem. Like we're going to keep these things intact, a lot of these power structures intact, and then just glom other stuff onto it by trying to solve the problem. So that idea is interesting. I don't know if you have thoughts about that, Leo, but like the idea of like we're going to come in and we're going to save the planet, and versus like, hey, we just maybe need to stop doing some of the stuff that we're doing rather than like adding stuff onto it. You know what I mean?
Totally, yeah. I mean, it's like assuming this role that humans have the right or obligation to make like the large, like impactful like changes on the earth, that we should be doing like everything within our ability to do what we think is right, which is like in my view like an over believing that like our intelligence or awareness or capacity is actually so far that we really can do that, instead of respecting the natural and working with and what's the word, like seeing the natural intelligence of just the world around us, because everywhere, like the world does all sorts of amazing things that
Yeah,
like
it doesn't need
if we
us to
kind
save
of
it necessarily.
yeah, like we can't save the the soil networks. Like the plants do all that, and all the critters and fungi and
Yeah,
stuff.
there's an incredible arrogance about a lot of this approach, and we'll go into some of like Charles Eisenstein, and I know Allison's been talking about him, and she's got a longer thing, but I do have some clips with Charles Eisenstein. But like there's definitely like this mentality that's really arrogant as far as I'm concerned. But like we're going to be the stewards.
Yeah, just and it's the same mentality if you read like early like occult literature from like the French Revolution, like in those sorts of groups that were really involved in that sort of thing. It's like a lot of the language, it was like this spiritual impulse to become the stewards of human evolution, and which is essentially eugenics, is the same exact concept that like we have to take control of evolution in order for some, just because we have to, basically, and to make us better, make things better.
Yeah.
And it's that, yeah, that sort of arrogance. And I think a lot of Web3 and like the uh, associations they're willing to make is because they think that what they're doing makes things better. So they're willing to work with organizations which they might even believe have been problematic or causing harm in the world for a long time. But since they think this new thing that they're doing is better, will make things better, they're willing to negotiate and work with those sorts of organizations also.
Well, I've even heard within like the blockchain regen space, uh, people saying things like, "Well, you have to get in bed with the devil in order to." Because we can
Yeah.
do, there's a mentality, because what it's doing is it's putting money and economics and this like market mentality on par with the natural world. And there's so much of this where they conflate the natural world with these artificial systems as if they're on equal par. And they're not. Like I don't have any loyalty whatsoever to any political system, any nation state, any monetary system. Like those things, that doesn't mean we can't do those things, and they might be useful in some, limited capacity. But to me, if we get right, if we get straight about the difference between artificial systems and the natural world, like that will go a long way. We'll go a long way in actually like moving forward, if we recognize that these two things are not on par. The natural world is sacred, and these other things like Charles Eisenstein, like sacred economics. I'm sorry, Charles, economics are not sacred. There is no such thing as beautiful money. It's trying to like, I don't know, like even like the biomimicry stuff is really screwy to me. That doesn't mean that, yes, you might do that, but recognizing that, that this is an artificial thing. This is a synthetic thing, and it should always be kept at a lower peg, in my view, than the natural world. To me, we should respect life and other people and free will so long as you're not doing harm. But yeah, it's I think there's a basic core fundamental worldview that a lot of this like grows out of, that's just wrong.
Yeah, and I think that we should probably get back to the article, but when we go into the clips of Eisenstein with RFK Jr., I think we'll be able to, because there's things I want to say, but I think it'll be better just to wait.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Our socioeconomic institutions must change course. To do otherwise is to condemn life itself. So like, again, well, I agree with that statement, actually. Our socioeconomics must change course. I do agree with that. Yes, it is unlikely that Wall Street will attempt to alleviate the building pressure of hyper-financialization. After all, the powers that be benefit from exporting unaccounted risk from the core outwards. Nonetheless, crisis has found its way back to the core. Crisis is evolving into a state of permanency. And the question is, a lot of these crises are actually, I would argue, manufactured. But leaving that aside, and
that's kind of what he's arguing, right? That it's like the unaccounted externalities are the manufacturing of this like permanent crisis.
Right. But I think he's kind of arguing that like it's a byproduct of just like doing business or whatever, where I would say that there are elements within this world that actually deliberately like do terrorist acts, for example, or, they actually literally manufacture it consciously and, like with the purpose of driving a certain goal or agenda. And that's a very different way of looking at the world, and not everybody agrees with that, but there's actually, a lot of evidence to back that up. There's anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And the company we're going to talk about later that I really want to talk about that, but looking into is VRisk.
Okay.
And that's that ties in a lot. But yes,
Okay.
keep going.
I'll make a note of that too, so that we. Um, so they talk about the unequal distribution of our global economic order, and so it's the word distribution is interesting to me because distribution of money of an artificial thing. So that's what's really interesting to me is like the idea of distribution kind of infers that there's some sort of central authority that's distributing things, and they like to talk about the government, that we don't want the government doing it. But this is, to me, it's similar to have like the algorithm or the the protocol, replacing the government. It's still kind of a centralized way of distributing, so that they've put themselves into this position of stewards, and we the wise are going to create a system of distribution that's going to be equal and fair.
Yeah, it's like the protocol is going to handle the distribution, and that's like their big thing is that we need to make new ways of generating money that promote the steward and like creation of more nature, and the way of that being measured and identified is through the protocol, through the blockchain protocol and related technology. So that's like, yeah, it just pretty much agreeing exactly with what you're saying, and that's the new distribution, and
Right.
yeah, kind of their changing
but the language is real deceptive, because you can get, when you listen to this stuff, it gets turned around, because they kind of like, they jump back and forth from this like free market to like this like socialist, they like, it's this weird thing. And the corresponding power of its institutional actors is to primarily blame. So there's this image here, if we can get it bigger. So these are all the problems that they're gonna,
all the problems
they're gonna fix for us. A global co-immune response is warranted, but in which movements should the seeds be response of this response to be planted? So I'm not the best reader. Better yet, where are the seeds already planted? Since the 1990s, the social solidarity economy, so this is an interesting term, SSE, social solidarity economy, and its ultra-modern ethos have grown in academic discourse and praxis. The SSE's grand strategy, transformative localization. And it's interesting, they say localization, but I don't view any of this as being, what I think of as localization doesn't have anything to do with some sort of protocol, like some distant global protocol that's directing you and steering you and rewarding you little tokens for doing what the protocol demands. So that, to me, that's not localization.
it's more like translocalization. I feel like could be a term for
yeah, that's a good
it's
term.
like it's like local, because it is local, like it a lot of these things target very specific things in a very specific place, but it's connecting it to this like abstracted layer that's the protocol that handles kind of
But the local agents, if you will, are being directed and steered by non-local things.
yeah.
Where was I?
And his writing is so like annoying to read. So
Yeah, for sure.
It'd be really hard.
Yeah, it is, but it's also really interesting too to look at the language that's used, because this language doesn't just like this. He didn't come up with this language. This language, I don't know how all that works out, because you see if you listen to like a lot of these talks, you'll see the same language kind of pop up everywhere, and it'd be interesting to look at how that evolves, like the language, because it's kind of a office speak type language. Work at the local level, make resilient the anthropos, periphery, pursue global co-immunity. Crypto networks can shine institutional tooling for today's SSE, and the SSE benefits of the cryptosphere by bridging it to the real economy. And then, do you want to say something about any of that? I don't know what this map is, but it's just a map of different projects. Or should
Not
I
really. I think
move
we
on?
can keep
Okay.
going. Yeah.
But I think that idea of bridging the technology and the tokens and these artificial things to the real world, to the real the real economy is interesting. I
Mhm.
shouldn't even say that, but like economy is even questionable. That's what's funny because I get into these things and there's like, oh wait, there's a problem with that too. Like even the language, I'm like, oh wait, yeah. it's it's hard to talk about
Yeah,
this
that's
stuff. You're always digging deeper, trying to like get to like, okay, wait a minute, how do I say this? Because we're using their language so much,
yeah.
anyways.
No, even just using money and yeah.
Um, the experimentation in complementary currencies, worker-owned cooperatives, and de-risking instruments such as mutualist societies are being explored in response to neoliberal access, and crypto networks can implement at scale each of these institutional innovations. And so I
Yeah.
actually have a big background in complementary currencies, but I didn't have any understanding of complementary currencies being tied to token, like distributed tokens from like some sort of like algorithmic, network. I was just thinking in terms of, hey, how do people within a community do exchanges with each other as independent people, without being connected to some sort of cybernetic grid. I didn't really have any comprehension of any of this when I was promoting complementary currencies. But did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, it did. So so I don't know. I'd say like where a lot of this is coming from in like what the ESG world and this sort of like large risk that's been pushed to the periphery that they're talking about. Like this is coming from the perspective of like global risk analysis from things like insurance companies and financial institutions and governments and stuff. And in response to this like risk that was, that exists and was, at least in some part, it obviously intentionally manufactured, which is undeniable in certain, I'm sorry, circumstances. That's what like these crypto cybernetic digital technologies are about, is that like global response to the risk. And that when we talk like when we get more into like the insurance companies and the parametric insurance and environmental modeling and all those sorts of things, I think we'll get a better sense of like how much, yeah, like where this is coming from and actually being directed from, even though they act like they're like acting in response against these excesses instead of just perpetuating the same exact excesses and following their exact trajectory.
And I'll also add one more thing too. When people talk about ESG, they frame it as, "Oh, this is just government. It's just government. The government wants the UN and the World Economic Forum is working with the government in order to implement these programs, and they almost frame like the corporations and business as being like the victims of this. So they frame it as it's government versus business, and I think that framing is inaccurate because it's both of them are working in concert. It's not like who's wagging who here is a big question. The banks and all of them are seem to be working together to bring about these things. So I think that's problematic, especially when it comes to like RFK um, and like Eisenstein, is they're kind of framing it as like, oh, it's just we need to let the markets take care of it. Well, this is actually what they're proposing here is literally creating markets out of this, and so. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
and like we know, like Allison's talked about this a lot, but I definitely agree and see that like ESG is basically as the metrics and indicators for the cybernetic system. It's just like a collection of metrics in different areas that are used to drive investment and activities in order to like make specific changes and that sort of thing. And that I see that as coming from essentially these like large scale data modeling and simulation efforts that have been going on since World War II, basically, and
Yeah.
that this is sort of the result of that. This is like from whatever they've seen or what's going on in the back rooms, that this is just where the the result that they're pushing from that
Right.
sort of work.
And it's not simply authoritarian government. It's actually creating these new markets that they can then gamble on. It's a merging of like socialism and capitalism into some weird hybrid Gila monster or something.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'll continue on. Um, by pursuing transformative localization, we avoid the overwhelming task of global economic reformation from the core. It is far easier to unite the peripheral SSE localities in new collaborative institutional constellations. So again, they're building up. It's like a building bottom up sort of building. We're going to start with the peripheral, start with the poor people, and then we're going to build from the inside, and then kind of eventually, like, the idea I think is to maybe change the larger systems. But it's actually coming from. It's not actually coming from the periphery. The people that are that are the subjects of this aren't actually involved at all in the design of any of this. So it's the idea of like talking about the periphery is kind of ridiculous, because this is centralized. What do they call it? Like planned economies.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like
I'm,
yeah, it's
I mean, even if you look at
it's sort of
these things, if they'll have like,
manicotti.
yeah, exactly. If they'll have like some indigenous person there, but they're just there that they're there like as a token. Really, it's they're really it's the financiers and the money people who are behind the design of this, not the periphery. It is far easier to unite the peripheral localities in a new collaborative institutional constellation, the cryptosphere. So welcome to the cryptosphere, everybody. In this milieu, is this milieu? Is that how you say it? In this milieu, I was going to say melee, but that's a different. That's a different thing. In this milieu, the rules of the game are flattened. And so that's important. The rules of the game, and that's the protocol that you're going. That's your new government. The protocol is your new government. It's the rules of the game. So all the people that are like, oh, it's the government so bad, you're actually replacing the government, which is corrupt, and everything they say about it is true. Like, it's horrible. And they say we need to remove the human element out of government because human beings are corrupt. But what they're setting up is an even more authoritarian system that's like remove the human. It's kind of interesting. Sustainability in the periphery must therefore come collaboratively from within the periphery itself, but it's not really coming from within the periphery because it's being directed from the center. It's being directed through the tokens and through the protocol. It's just being executed from the periphery. And I think that's an important thing. And also the whole thing about edges is interesting. A while back ago, Allison and I were talking about the Voronoi patterns, like these. Did you remember that, Leo? The Voronoi?
Yeah. I don't know a ton about it, but basically these sorts of um, like dimensional relationships between connections. That doesn't
Well,
really
it
make
was
sense,
like
but
there would be like two cities, and what's the right. The center point between the two positions, and then you draw a line between them, and it creates these like weird patterns from like all these different points, but you're actually measuring the edges is what it is. You're measuring the edges from all the points, and then it's the edges is where they're trying to create, like, this is what they're talking about. They're trying to steer the periphery. But I think I need to go back and revisit the Voronoi thing. But it was an interesting thing. It had to do with like ants and how they like move around, and they wanted to kind of like they created these computer programs to like make the best route. But a lot of it had to do with measuring the distance between the center between two different points. Anyways, Voronoi, very important. So So this is 12 major core financial institutions caught in the market manipulation scandals. This is just talking about scandals, which of course are a real thing. And I think, they have, it's interesting they have Credit Suisse Group in here because this is, and I don't know what the previous scandal, I'm sure there's constant scandals with all of these. But this Credit Suisse was in here, but this is 2020. So the major Credit Suisse was just happened. But I actually think I'm of the position, like I think the Great Depression was planned. I think it was designed. There's a lot of evidence to back that up. They sent out letters to all the banks to call in the loans. There's a lot of evidence that was actually a contrived, manufactured event. So I actually think a lot of these collapses are not just like, oh, whoops, we let it get out of hand. But I'm sure it's a little bit of both, like there's incompetency and then there's also planning. But
and like you recognize when things are getting out of hand, like before everyone else does, and then they're able to.
And every once in a while,
take advantage of that situation.
Yeah, totally. And it just conveniently, they'll always have these. One of the reasons why I think these things are planned too is because they'll always have these things just sitting there on the sidelines, and then like, oh wait, all of a sudden. So I did a couple interviews with John Titus, and he's been looking into the Federal Reserve, and they have this annual event every year. It's like the Federal Reserve has their it's kind of like a G8 summit sort of thing. It's like a meeting where all the central bankers come to. It's in Jackson's Hole, Wyoming, every year. And in 2019, BlackRock presented this paper called going direct, about how we need to change the way the banking system is done and we need to inject money directly into the economy. Not going into all the details about that, but the point is, 6 months after they presented this paper, they said we need to prevent what happened in 2008 from happening again. And here's the solution. And then all of a sudden, 6 months later, they have COVID and they have, let's implement this program now. So there's always, it's same thing with like the Patriot Act or different things like that come like right after 9/11. They're like, well, here we have this thing that's just sitting here. So anyways, not to belabor that point, but something to think about.
Yeah, and wasn't there already a banking crisis in was that September of 2019 in like the repo markets when they had to, I forget exactly what they did, but they had to basically like just give free money to the banks for those short-term like lending situations in the repo market. It was like a pretty big thing that kind of got ignored, and then everything else happened that winter.
Yeah. I should go back and revisit that. But yeah, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure. Are we at the collaboration is not a new strategy?
Yes.
Okay. Collaboration is not a new strategy. It underlies all institutional soft power and is omnipresent in the core, just using a different title, collusion. We know that free markets are rarely free. Over time, capital accumulates to a small group of winners. Today's global financial markets are hierarchical, both institutionally represented as oligopolistic industry formations and financially as accumulated capital. It should come as no surprise that collusion between these transnational actors labeled facilitative practices is very hard to detect and enforce. I kind of take that as, just another, he's trying to make another argument for why that like large scale, that like where the power and capital is in society needs to be on a technology that promotes transparency, and to try to turn collusion into just like coordination, but like more transparent collusion.
Yeah. When also like the oligopolistic, huh?
Which I mean, it's like just recently looking. There's so many like financial consortiums and like big institutions with blockchain and like related things of basically just shared databases between big institutions. Um, so there, I mean, in which I'm sure they're already, of course, we're doing for a really long time, but it's
When the idea that
yeah,
they're going to somehow like remove this hierarchy, remove a hierarchy within the economics. I mean, so much of this is being funded by venture capitalists. I mean, like, do we really think that, and hedge funds, and the central banks, and do we really think that they're funding a system that's going to give them less power? Like, I mean,
no,
it's kind of absurd. So it's still going to be, it's going to be, uh, it's going to still going to be like an oligarchy, but it'll be like a programmed one, a programmed
yeah,
automated
a
one.
program, and it's gonna retain all the like legal like because it's all in order for like the big incumbent institutions to like use this stuff. They only use it once they get like the legal aspects and the intellectual property and all those aspects of the data systems like nailed down that they like actually use it. Um, so it's like even though they're on smart contracts or whatever, it still enshrines like the basic legal hierarchies. Like that's what like law makes those sorts of like hierarchical institutions possible, like property law and you know contract law and all the and corporate law and all these things that define like what they can and can't do, which they can basically do anything. But
Yeah. And all of this is built on what's the quote, like, you can't solve a problem with the same mindset that created it. This is exactly that. This is trying to, solve a problem without, this is coming up with a solution without actually addressing the underlying problem, and furthermore by actually expanding upon the underlying problem in my view.
yeah, I'm gonna skip down to that highlighted part because I feel like that
Yeah, sure.
is to this end. I propose a new praxis. Can you pull up slightly?
Oh
Just
yeah.
this end, I propose a new praxis: cryptospheric ecotechnics. Just like I think this is a good paper to read, but also realizing that it's just like a lot of this language is just like I think some of the words really aren't that useful to know, like some of them, and they're just kind of trying to flower up a thing that's not
You
really
don't like
what it is. But
xenocommodification?
so, to this end, I propose a new practice: cryptospheric ecotechnics. Imagine instead of manipulating living organisms through applied science and engineering to create commodities, we manipulate the anthropos through the crypto-economic engineering in service of the biosphere. So, I mean, like, that's kind of the thing. Like, that's what they're saying they're doing. They're engineer like through crypto economics, it's essentially social engineering to be in service of the biosphere. So creating these like logic, like algorithmic technological systems to promote social movements in like a predefined direction that are all supposedly in service of natural life.
Yeah, and the
Which is just
manipulation,
like
where
this.
we manipulate their anthropos, through crypto. Yeah, that's a lot of people that are in this space think like, oh, this is freedom. This is going to let me do what I want to do. That's like, no, this is steering. This is steering you and manipulating you. But they don't see it. My frustration with talking to people about money has been that is like they don't. I get money and then I can do whatever I want with the money, and they don't understand like the money or the token creation itself is a form of steering and control. Like, so like you can control a lot of what happens in society by the initial placement of money through credit, and then the design of the money itself, so the tokens. So it's this is an extension of that token engineering. And it's
I'll
interesting.
keep going.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, you go. cryptospheric ecotechnics would include biomimetics, systems design, cybernetics, their derivative policy frameworks, and cyber-physical environmental intelligence. Its practitioners would concern themselves with interrelating the biosphere and the human-made technosphere. Its yardsticks would be the UN's Sustainable Development Goals or the Index of Sustainable Economic Welfare. Let us invert today's relationship between our techne and the biosphere. Instead of multitudes of energy slaves serving every person, let us imagine multitudes of communities of purpose and capital itself serving every ecoregion. I don't really understand that last sentence, but
I think it's just saying
the
um, rather than serving capital itself, you're serving the environment through the tokens. I think is what it's saying.
okay.
But you still have the capital itself. You're doing both actually. You're serving capital, and supposedly the capital is serving the environment or the eco region. But I don't even think it's doing that. I think it's just serving capital, and it's like a new structure that gives lip service to ecology. But like I think it's all bullshit myself.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it just that first part that I was reading, pretty clear what he's saying: biomimetics, system design, cybernetics, and the derivative poly frameworks in cyber physical environmental intelligence. And like what I've been looking at the most is really that last part, the cyber physical environmental intelligence and the technologies for monitoring and defining what like healthy ecosystems are and those sorts of metrics, and then creating the financial prerogative that reflects the data essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, let's see.
This picture of Burning Man,
Do we keep
which
going?
I must admit
Oh.
I've I've attended a fair share of Burning Mans and I've had a great time at it. But I know a lot of people that go to it are promoters of a lot of this stuff, which I don't support. So yeah, the article is pretty long. So I think let's go to some clips and then we because we have a lot of other content here, and then maybe I'll read some more of the article like later on my own because there is some interesting stuff in here. But you're right, like the language, a lot of the language is like I think intentionally made like academic. There's a lot more reasonable ways to explain a lot of this stuff, but they. You use language like liquid substrates and xenocommodification, and people think that you're some sort of expert on it. You sound like you know what you're doing.
This intersection of like the co-immunity idea, this like sort of hive mind resilience through essentially like cybernetic coordination. And there's this company called Matiga Solutions that is like one of these environmental catastrophe modeling. Like they specialize in atmospheric modeling and other things, but also just large scale simulations. And they came out of like the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, but
Hmm.
and they are the modelers on one of the tokenized parametric insurance contracts between the Red Cross and I forget which country actually off the top of my head, but for a volcano bond. But anyways, they had another project that was involved like getting health data from African people in Kenya, like making them fill out surveys or other things, and then we're working in conjunction, like in to get they're incentivizing people to fill out this information through community currencies.
Mm-hmm.
And in the like report I saw, they didn't say who it was, but it's likely grassroots economics was just like the only big community currency project in Kenya that I know of. So it's probably them, and they've had other like they've talked about each other, but yeah, basically this idea that these people are being incentivized, have a monetary incentive to give information that feeds these large scale simulations that are essentially coordinating that like global hive mind co-immunity idea. Um, and then that's like, yeah, they come up with all these analytics about how things like epidemics and natural disasters will influence the businesses and like money flows in those communities because they have, since it's a digital community currency, they're getting all this information about like how people interact and like what like hubs there are of economic activity in a different way. And then it also gives them a more fine controlled like financialization in like a kind of hyper local way because it's just like a currency that's just used in one place. And with the technology, they can make it like bound to one area.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, and people don't realize like how information can be used. They think, oh, it's about me. I'm not doing it, and I don't. Whatever. If they collect data on me, but they don't understand
yeah,
how like if you understand all these different things, you can predict things and you can steer things and you can manipulate. You can manipulate the outcome of elections. You can manipulate. That's my whole thing about democracy. It's such a fraud because they've got the whole thing controlled. Like we don't have democracy. We've never had democracy, and no, and we haven't had even a democratic republic, you know, because the idea of a democratic republic is the people you elect represent you, and it's pretty clear. Everybody knows these people don't represent you. So the idea of democracy is bullshit. Anyways, that's a whole. I need to do a whole show just about the ideas and concepts of democracy itself, but. The whole thing can be manipulated and steered. So like a lot of the people behind some of this stuff are literally gamblers. And so if you understand like gambling and like particularly like poker and like knowing what all the players, knowing different things about like their personality and whatnot, like if you can predict their moves, you can win the game. So it's like they talk about the rules and it's going to be a game. There's going to be the rules of the game, but the game's going to be largely, and it already is, manipulated and rigged. You know. So yeah, like the idea that like collecting information, well, what's the big deal? You know, so they collect information. People just don't understand like the higher level uses of that information, I guess is what I'm saying.
yeah, totally. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, they don't know where it's going, what it's being used for, and it's used in a really large variety of things, and some that seem innocuous or even necessary because like, you know, of course on some level information about things is like important for like doing anything with other people or whatnot, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I have some since we're on the since we're on the Pat Rawson thing, why don't we just show a few clips? These were clips that you'd given me on Pat Rawson, and then we'll just go through these clips and then chat about them, because this is from the same author as this article here.
This is a chart from the Designing Regenerative Cultures book that I mentioned, and this is kind of my life's work, perhaps. The idea is that we take these strict hierarchical orders, these command and control structures that corporations utilize today, that most institutions utilize today, and we want to create something that is more polycentric. Polycentrism implies recursivity. It implies organizations nested within each other, organizations, in very loose formations, evolving in very organic ways. What it does not imply is something like you might see in a Big Four consulting firm today that has a very strict hierarchy and a very protocolized way of interacting with each other. I love that. We already kind of went over this with Luis's talk. Thank you, Luis. But I want to emphasize, the special sauce that makes Web3 different, in that you can now become co-owners of your own platforms. One thing struck out. There was a Reddit comment about these riots that happened in Minnesota. This Black Lives Matters problem. People burned down a police station. They were burning down local businesses. primarily the Black community. And someone interviewed them and they said, why are you doing this? These are your businesses. And the person said, we don't own any of this. We don't have any stake in what happens to these businesses. And the nice thing about Web3 is you get to have a stake. You didn't get to own a piece of Facebook. With Web3, you can own a piece of your own social media platform. You get to finally have the sense of responsibility that ownership brings, and you get to benefit from the wealth that it creates. And this is what we want to achieve with this polycentric network of DAOs.
So yeah, we're gonna stop people from burning things down because you're gonna be an owner. you're gonna be a stakeholder. What do you have to say about that, Leo?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that clip was crazy, and just in the way he talked about it too, it's like, I mean, it just seemed like really dismissive of what people have been going through, and like, how Black people, and just like this whole history of it's just been a history of domination and cruelty and violence, and like that. It's like, they're burning down these buildings and police station, and they just need to become co-owners of Walgreens and Target, and then like they'll become like pro-social beings, and that's what we're going to do with Web3, and we're going to make you all co-owners so that you can't like rebel, essentially. It's like,
well, it's a lie anyways, because I've thought a lot about this with like poorer communities. Like, for one, people like, wow, they don't take care of their own communities or whatever. Like, there's trash everywhere. And well, first of all, there's a lot more money for trash. It's not like rich people clean up their own communities either. Like, it's kind of stupid anyways. There's people that are paid to come in and clean those communities up, and poor communities don't have that. But I did think about, like, there is an idea there that people do take, if they genuinely own something, they will often take more pride in it than if they're renting, for example. But this ownership is bullshit. It's not like you getting to own your own house. That's a whole different thing. Like, this is my house, I own this house, versus I own 1/10 of 100% of Walgreens or whatever. It's a meaningless ownership. It's like, I get to vote along with all the million other people that get to vote. Your vote doesn't mean jack shit in that context. And also just knowing how this whole thing, how this, democracies are manipulated. Look at boards of directors. You could have, or look at Congress. You could have like one person that actually has values that you share, but it's completely meaningless. Their vote doesn't mean anything at all, because it's, the consensus, which is the majority, whatever they measure that to be, even if it's a higher majority, like say 80% or something, it's still, this ownership idea is actually kind of meaningless in this context. It's going to be a token ownership. It's not going to be genuine ownership where you actually have real stake. It's going to be a fake stake, a faux stake.
Yeah, and like in the context of, because where they're going with this, and what I believe the next clip is, that it's like ownership of the ecosystem services, or the rights to the monetary benefits of the ecosystem services, is what they're talking about and moving towards. So becoming like a co-owner of that would make you want to take better care and maximize the potential ecosystem services of that, like, plot of land or something. And that's their story about it. Whereas in reality, and like one of the things we can show later on, like one of these dashboards for, it's not this project, but a similar sort of thing, where the people involved in the, like, generating the data to create the carbon credits or whatnot, it's just you just like are going out there with a phone and taking pictures of trees and like measuring them basically, and then you get rewarded if that data is accepted by the validators, which is basically like the Oracle system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then you're rewarded with tokens that would give you more voting stake in the area or monetary benefits selling them as carbon credits and that sort of thing. And it's just it's very different than interacting with a place and with the life around you because of like the love of it, or for just like feeling your own sense of
not because you're going to get a token, not because you're getting a token.
Yeah.
When we know that, it's like people will find all kinds of ways to manipulate that, both at the bottom and the top, on all levels of it. Once you turn it into this whole gamified market thing, it's not going to be what they claim it's going to be in terms of actually protecting.
But what I will say, and like what I do have some sympathy for, is like people who do farm and like take care of the land and stuff, and like want to and try to do the what feels best for that, like and a lot of I'm definitely like support a lot of the words are all are weaponized, like regenerative agriculture and stuff, but a lot of those, all those practices, a lot of them it's like really important, amazing stuff, and massive amounts of respect for anyone growing food and doing that work. And
absolutely.
But there's no money. They're all going broke doing this, and that what Web3 and all these ecosystem services stuff is offering money for that, where they basically don't have to do anything. They just have to agree for the satellites, or to capture information from their phone or anything like that. Some like low tech, or not low tech, but just not that difficult for them to be onboarded onto these systems, and then get a check for it, to get money for it. And I think that's where they're actually, where it's kind of working, and not exactly the total Web3 things, but there's a lot of money from like the USDA. The USDA just announced like maybe a year or two ago, like $4.3 billion for this basically like smart commodities program, which is a bunch of different grants in a bunch of different areas, building things, a lot like this for carbon credits, ecosystem services, like a lot of marketing things about creating like new brands and kind of labels, just like organic or non-GMOs, like things like that. And other ways of basically trying to get more money to farmers using these new technologies and like financial products. And they're targeting like, Black farmers, native areas. A lot of the projects are with tribal governments and like this sort of thing. And they're getting them onto these systems, but it's hard to say no when you don't really have to do that much in order to get more money for just enrolling into a conservation program through the USDA, which is what a lot of them are sold as.
And you don't need tokens. Like you need, why do you need tokens? You need or money or whatever. You need them to pay your rent, or to buy food, or to to do the thing, buy clothes and whatever, to live. And but you don't necessarily need them to do that type of work. It's just, and so that steering mechanism starts. It's not coming from the people that are passionate about it. I have a lot of friends that are deeply involved with permaculture and a lot of these different things, and they don't make money at it. They do it because they really genuinely care. And the practice, like you said, the practices themselves are good. And but once you introduce that token, the motivation will change over time. You're going to have people, I think the people that are already committed are going to continue to be committed, and they're going to do the right thing regardless of whether there's a token available for it or not.
Totally.
But the idea is that it's removing agency from the actual people to the people that are deciding what they're going to issue tokens for and what they're not going to issue token for. And then of course, not talking about all the fact that there's all these financial markets and these venture capitalists, and I would call them vultures. Maybe that's a little harsh, but like there's this whole apparatus behind all of this that is not at all interested. I'm sorry, it doesn't give a shit about permaculture. The money interests behind this are not actually interested in that. And so, I guess they'll claim that there's going to be a lot of individual, like small time investors that will, somehow make it pure or something. I don't know. I have an interview. I don't know if you saw it, but I interviewed this guy years ago called Manish Jain. And he was talking about in India, he used to work for like the World Bank, and he used to be all part of like international NGOs, and he kind of challenged it. Although now I'm kind of questioning what he's doing these days. But anyways, the interview was really, really good. I did this like probably 10 years ago, but he was talking about in India where he grew up, it used to be, people used to leave, we went back to visit his village, and they weren't taking care of the well. There was a well with well water. He's like, why aren't you guys taking care of the well? And they said, well, there's no money for us to do that. And it actually doesn't cost money. It just takes someone to do it. But even though there's people that sitting around that could take care of the thing, they weren't doing it because they weren't being paid to do it. And he also said that like it used to be custom to leave water outside of your house for people passing by, or if anybody had needed it. And it was actually a blessing on your house, like culturally, if someone drank the water. And he said people quit doing that because the water became then commodified. And so now that's not a practice that people do anymore. And so this is the same thing. It's basically commodifying and turning everything into a market, which removes your relationship to the land, removes your relationship to the activity itself. I don't know.
It's like commodifying inspiration, motivation to do, to do what you love.
Yeah, and if it's not coming, it's coming from, it's coming. There's a guy, Alf B. Cohn. I know Allison has some issues with him, and and I'm sure I probably would agree with that. But he did have this talk about unconditional parenting, where he was talking about with kids, you don't want to use punishment or rewards with your children, because you're teaching them to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. In other words, if you're giving them a reward or you're punishing them, you don't want kids to steal, your children to steal, because it's not right to steal and it hurts this other person, not because they're going to get punished or they're going to get a reward for not doing it. But it changes. There's a calculation that starts to go on, like, oh, am I going to get rewarded? So this is a similar sort of thing. It's like using rewards in order to get people to do the right thing. I don't think is a way to go. All right, let's jump to the
There's
next
also
one.
a level. Yeah, I guess we can keep going.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. That like, with this ecosystem service stuff, it's about creating money and markets, like without, like, not even to get people to do anything. Like, it's literally just about getting the data to show that, like, plants grow in an area, and then saying that that's generating X amount of carbon sequestration or whatever other air quality or biodiversity, and then just writing a check essentially for that thing. So it's like on one level, it's like not even about like getting people to do anything differently. It's about just kind of this new, what they sort of claim is like new kind of money creation or value creation by recognizing these like externalities that were ignored before.
Right. And then making it look good on paper, or not paper, but digitally.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This
Well, and
is
like
how
acting like
such tokens would
Wait, hold on
compose
one second.
upwards
One
into.
second. Okay, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and like acting like it's not just like it's just about landowners. That's like the people who own the land. This obviously completely benefits because in this like new world where there's revenue streams for just the existence of nature. They own all the nature, so
Yeah, yeah.
they all own the land, so they get all the revenue stream. So it's just like on one very simple level, it's just completely enshrining the same sort of.
Well, that's another thing that's interesting too, because the land ownership and all the real central pivot points of power are still going to be owned and controlled by the same that is now. Like that's not going to change.
Mm-hmm.
It's just they're going to have this layer. They're adding like another layer on top of it that gives that might give some people a little bit more income or whatever. But it's ultimately like it's like the land ownership itself isn't going to be suddenly redistributed or anything like that, which I don't even like. I one of these days I really need to like go down and like articulate all my ideas about land, but I actually don't believe in land ownership, period. Like I don't I actually think that idea itself is as a major part of the problem. But that doesn't mean I'm saying that the government should own the land either. I actually literally think that like the idea of land ownership is crazy, and human beings shohave a right to live on land.
The idea of ownership is kind of crazy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one thing, it's a possession, like, oh, I've got a bicycle and I'm using my bicycle. Someone shouldn't just be able to come up and take the bicycle that I'm using, but it's a different framing, like I have a home. I think I should have exclusive rights to the home I'm living in, but I wouldn't frame it within because I paid money and I bought it and I own it. Or I have a mortgage on it or whatever. It would be because I have a right to live and this is where I'm living. It's coming from more of a true human rights perspective. Anyways, it's complicated, but the property issue, it's hard to find books that are critical of like property itself. Like it really is. Like I've looked, there's not a lot out there. Anyways, okay, so let's jump to the next one.
This is how such tokens would compose upwards into a single island ecology. On the upper right, you can see these various zones representing different geo-NFTs of the reefs of Curacao. Each of the reefs in these zones has different flora, fauna, and so forth. This was pulled from a nonprofit which studies the reefs. But you can imagine that each of these 8 zones turned into cryptocurrencies. Those cryptocurrencies basketed into a single currency, an insurance mechanism added onto that automates intervention into the health of the reefs. And now you have a self-automating financial system that represents nature. And that's what we wanted at the very beginning.
Oh, what's wrong with that? Geo NFTs.
Yeah, so
thoughts?
Yeah, so geo NFT is like that's how, and I've seen this in a few other places, but basically that property rights being defined as a token on the blockchain, which is it's just like a data registry for defining with geospatial data, saying that this is a delineation. Like that's all it is. But based off of that, each geo NFT would have associated environmental data from like satellites or mobile phones and like manual reporting and or sensors too. And then that data is being used to create all the financial incentives, which we've already talked about quite a bit. And then what he referred to, which when looking into it, it gets quite complicated on like the details, but creating insurance mechanisms to ensure the revenue streams that come from the environmental data. And that's basically parametric insurance. So that if something happens that destroys the reef in this circumstance, that disrupts its data generating abilities that that insurance contract would pay out because of that destruction from like a hurricane or something. And yeah, good.
Well, it's funny because it's like the idea of tokenizing, tokenizing nature. Like they have a stream having its own, token or whatever. Well, what about the tornado? I mean, or the earthquake? Shouldn't it have its own token? And shouldn't it have a say in all this? Maybe it wants that thing to be destroyed, and it needs to be incorporated into the marketplace. I'm joking here, of course.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, well, that's the thing. So these are all like all this stuff is informed and a part of global environmental simulations in monitoring. Like that's unavoidable, and that's just how it is. So, like when we're saying something is tokenized, it's really just it's digital information associated with like some sort of defined, separated area of the world, and that the way that happens depends on what they're doing. It's the most straightforward with like land, because there's just like land doesn't change, like a hurricane changes, and you can't really just like define a hurricane, but you could define like probably the jet stream or like larger atmospheric phenomenon, and which certainly have like a stream of data associated with it because they have satellites watching it this whole time, and then they can tell from the satellites like speeds and temperature and moisture and all these other things, and then just based off that they could create essentially it's a token, but it's just a way of like isolating dynamics on the earth.
For example, like a river having its own NFT, or that having the river be like some sort of like actor or agent within the system, within a market system. So like if someone were to poison that river, then they have to pay that river money, or tokens or whatever. Like that's what I kind of understood, like, so that some of that idea of actually giving nature itself some sort of like agency within within the market system itself, like that's programmed in, you know what I mean? I know that's another layer.
Like the idea that the river, like, because they talk about with like the interspecies currency with Ledgard and stuff, that will be like giving money to the giraffes or the rivers and whatnot. And I feel like that sort of the way that's talked about is to try just I think just obfuscating what's happening, and that it's not like, I guess I understand the idea that they want to make it into an agent in order for it to be a part of.
But it's a lie anyway. It's a joke anyways. It's not. It doesn't actually have a voice in this. It's they're speaking on its behalf. I mean, it's totally ridiculous. The whole concept is ridiculous. That's just. But those ideas have been thrown out there.
Yeah, it's just about paying the people that own the river.
Right.
It's not, or the conservation group that
manages
benefits.
Yeah,
the green finance deal that. So the conservation group can get paid or whatever. And that's all I guess.
Okay, well we'll jump on to another one. This one's on the impact dashboard.
This is an example of what the governance interface can look like. I understand it's a little hard to read. I apologize for that. You can see this 2,500 number. That is the number of open votes. Kind of the votes in the system as it is today. That 1,500 number, that is the number of active votes, so the votes that are being applied to different initiatives. If a vote passes, you can imagine that it would be retired to the total open votes number. You can see here the 6 impact areas of Colectivo, actually. I'm going to list them out because we didn't list them before. Technical innovation, general Colectivo, Maybe this isn't the 6. We'll work with it. Art and culture, social entrepreneurship, environment, and governance. You can see in the interface the related SDGs, so the various UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. We want to kind of attach, this should be an impact-focused interface. Like that, we approach the interface design with the idea, like this is going to be used to create impact in your communities.
So.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
sort of speaks for itself, but that the whole point of this is measuring impact, measuring how things relate to each other, and just gathering data on as many different possible areas as possible. And then clearly he's talking about impact finance, essentially, that they want to look at as much areas as possible that the protocol can interrelate with. So like not just environmental stuff and having as many trees or as many different types of animals as possible, but like cultural value, and however, I'm not sure how they measure that or like what that means, but like that there's as many different metrics as possible that can all be used to define the value of an area in this sort of new cybernetic ecological.
And they can program anything into the system, like once it's set up, like they can. Yeah. And so like they talk about, taking the human element out of this, but it's bullshit. Like there are human beings that are going to be programming this and steering this, deciding it. Once the protocol is in place, then at that point, from that point on, the human being is out of it, other than just playing the game, going by the rules of the protocol. But just thinking about what's being set up and like how this, they're setting up this system, this programmable system. This is just one of many, many, many different things. The Collectivo is just one of many different companies out there that are pushing these ideas forward. So we are moving into a cybernet wherever it comes from, whether it may not be Collectivo, it may be a different company or whatever, but these ideas are really important for people to understand that they're really setting up the system where our lives are going to be programmed. and you're not going to, they say, well, you still have choice, but once you need the token in order to survive, once you need the token to have access, just to get on the bus or whatever, the choice is, there's no choice. You don't have the choices to be excluded. Anyways, maybe I'm going off a tangent here, but just the idea of like programming the world is insane to me. Yeah,
and we'll get into it too, but we can look at things like, the World Bank and the BIS both have their own separate, like pretty far along. One of them is live, like literally blockchain systems for global registries of carbon credits and for bonds based on projects that would generate those credits and stuff. And it's just like thing that exists now, which it's very, in a lot of ways, very similar to this, but just slightly different, more based on, institutional stuff and slightly less technological, or like esoteric-y and like idealistic as like what these people are talking about, but it's pretty much the same exact thing, and it's moving more towards this stuff just slowly. And carbon credits is just like the first solid one, because they've made this like really big narrative about carbon, and then so they've created these markets pretty effectively, and so that's just like the first thing that's really gained momentum. But
One in a minute we'll get into the Charles Eisenstein and that like him and RFK Jr. talk about how that the ESG thing is bad and is controlling everybody, and yet Charles Eisenstein is working with Cello, and so which is doing just that, right?
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous, and like they'll specifically say like Davos and those people are doing this totalitarian climate agenda thing, but then like literally Cello is. I mean, I'm sure I can't think
I've
of it
got
off the top.
I've
But
got
if you
some
just
clips.
Google
Yeah.
Cello WEF, I'm sure they have things that they're associated with them, and that they come out of the UN um, food
Oh yeah.
the food innovation program, and come out of MIT, and like it's just they're like the most institutional international Western like thing out there, and they work with like Mercy Corps and these sort of like State Department aid groups that are banking the unbanked and doing digital AI micro work and all these other things. And so
Yeah,
it's just
I
like,
know Allison's going to do a thing coming up here, a longer thing on the Eisenstein, and I have his book. I filmed him. I've met him a couple times,
oh
and
really?
I liked his work. Back in the day before I didn't really understand all this. Actually, this was back before Satoshi's white paper. So this is even before blockchain. So I didn't have any comprehension of any of this, but just the general idea is if you listen to him, even now, if you listen to him, a lot of it sounds really good. You're like, oh yeah. Like we need to do that. But he's like he's actually one of the most two-faced people I've actually come across in a very long time. He is like literally doing the exact opposite of what he's talking about when he gives these talks to people. he's by promoting, I mean, Cello, it's kind of amazing, but we'll go into some clips with him here in a minute here.
Yeah.
So
He's joined our case campaign, right? He's an advisor on our case campaign.
Exactly.
Pretty wild.
Exactly. So I got one more from this talk here on the phone ID.
Oh yeah.
So what's going to be changing here? The first is our governance system. We are going to have elected executives, you might know them as stewards in the language of Collectivo, by member users or collective member owners, as I like to think of them. Prosumers, that's another word that gets put out.
Prosumers. The clip you sent me didn't include this first part, but I just included it because I thought it was interesting, because the idea of like, we're all just going to be stewards and prosumers. I mean, just this guy's languaging is just ridiculous. But yeah, the governance structures, it's going to give people like these limited positions where they feel like they have some sort of authority or whatever, but they're really being steered and guided, just like a manager has a certain protocol that they have to go by. You don't really have any agency here.
And I think it's like, it's just a new version of corporate governance. It's just like this kind of more technological system that is trying to fulfill what corporate governance has been doing this whole time, which is like organizing people and resources in like a legally defined way. And this is sort of just, I see it as like an evolution of that. And like, yes, there's a level that they're being managed by the protocol, but they're also creating the protocol as they're doing it too. And that's like what governance is the ability to change and update the protocol like as they do it. So I think there's kind of, it's not just so mechanistic that they're like the protocol's set and never changes, and they're being defined, and like that's almost part of their myth is that the protocol's there, and that's like what's that you can't do anything corrupt because of that. But even with just basic blockchain, it's governed by people. There's governance to Bitcoin, there's governance to Ethereum. It's just that's just a word for the dynamic of power and how things are changed in the system.
Right. When the ultimate steering comes through, I would say through the tokens, like you're going to do what the tokens, what's rewarded. Right.
Yeah. That's definitely.
In terms of our identity system, we are going to have phone numbers attached to addresses. You will be able to send Kuridai to a phone number, and that person doesn't have to have a blockchain address. That person will get a notice that, hey, you have some money waiting for you. And once they create an address, they'll be able to associate that address with their phone number. This is necessary because many people are new to blockchain. They're still figuring out what addresses are. They're figuring out what wallets are, but they do understand phone numbers pretty intuitively.
So yeah, you want to say something
That's like,
about the phone ID?
yeah, definitely. That's like a main feature of Celo. So Collectivo is being built on the Celo blockchain, and that this is sort of because Celo's positioned itself as like almost like a blockchain for humanitarian organizations and like doing all these sorts of things. So one of their things was really making it's like a mobile blockchain first and foremost. And one of the like features of that is they have this system where you can send crypto to a phone number to someone's phone number, and then like he explained, they just have to download the app and then we'll have the money without ever having like made a blockchain identity before. But what's important to know is that that's creating a digital identity, not, and phones already are doing that in a lot of ways too, but just creating a blockchain based digital identity once you're creating your address, and then can have be defined as like an agent in that system and interact with DeFi and all these other types of Web3 applications. And
Did you ever see this this thing? Allison sent this out. I don't know if you.
oh yeah,
If you look at
I've
this
looked at
thing.
it. Yeah,
Well, it's just an art project is all it is. It's this art project that this person did, where they build like an art like a mechanical plant. That I'll play the video, but I've just got it muted. 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 It's mutated. But I'll play the video, but I've got it muted because the girl that talks, it's kind of hard to like hear. She's got a thick accent, and it was really hard to say. But I'll just while I'm playing it, I'll explain what it is. But it's just an art project. But the idea is interesting because that's kind of what they're doing with us. We are the plantoids. So the idea is, that they create this plant, this mechanical plant, and then you can send it ETH, you can send it tokens, and then it wants to create other plants, like duplicate itself, and then it'll do different things. If you can pay it certain money to do things, and it'll get happy. You need to feed it. You need to feed the plant with tokens. And so they say it's like this living, a synthetic plant that lives off of the blockchain. It's like, anyways, it was kind of an interesting thing. And then once it gets enough tokens, then it can then create another version of itself or something similar, and then pay it tokens. So it becomes like this automated, self-perpetuating thing. But I thought that idea was kind of interesting because that's like what we're doing. It's like they're gonna steer us with the little tokens, and then even creating like these artificial things that will also be players within that tokenized game, the synthetic plantoids or whatever. But yeah, this is, if you get a chance, like check out this. It's from the consensus media. Sorry. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. But anyways, I thought that was kind of a funny aside. This silly art project.
yeah. There's a lot of weird kind of art stuff like that in crypto space.
This is one of the clips that you wanted to talk about from it was an RFK Jr. interview with Charles Eisenstein, and Charles Eisenstein is like you said, he's working with Celo. He's actually officially, this interview was done last year in 2022, but now he's officially working on RFK Jr.'s campaign. But he wrote a book called Sacred Economics. He talks about beautiful money. He's a big promoter of a lot of the stuff we're talking about with the Collectivo thing. Tokenized environmentalism. So I'll just play this clip, and then we'll.
The kind of war footing, let's make war on carbon, has played into the hands of the kind of Davos billionaires who are proposing solutions that are, repressing civil rights, repressing human rights, controlling humanity, and imposing these huge high profit, high capital geoengineering projects that will make them richer, that will make democracy weaker, that will, screw around with things that, and unfortunately, you have environmentalists who are looking at Bill Gates as a hero, and looking at some of the Davos crowd that they're the ones who are going to provide the solution, overlooking the fact that these guys are all landing there in their private planes, burning up carbon like hell, and really not doing any. Gates is heavily invested in all the big carbon producers, and his solutions are all about geoengineering, and environmental movement has somehow allowed itself to get trapped into an alliance with these guys rather than the kind of solutions you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's almost inevitable when we frame the problem in terms of a number, because it lends itself to the same kind of thinking that, it's actually financial thinking. It's an accounting mindset. And it's the same as if you're trying to base social policy on maximizing economic growth. Anytime you base it on maximizing or minimizing a number, what gets left out is everything that doesn't fit into your metrics, or the things that you choose not to measure because they don't redound to the interests of those commissioning the measurements, or the things that are fundamentally qualitative. Those are assumed not even to exist.
So, knowing what you know, Leo, what are your thoughts about his statement there about like reducing everything to a number and making this about, profit? There is some truth that, like, particularly like in what Kennedy says about the problems with the Davos crowd. But again, they've got their own version of management system that's put into place that is also reducing things to a number and connecting it to markets. Thoughts?
Exactly. So what Eisenstein's saying, a lot of it would be on the surface if you didn't know anything about what he's supported and what his work's about. It's of course you can't reduce everything to a number and choose how to act based on metrics. Like that, everyone knows that no one lives their life based on metrics, and that's not how people care about each other. Sure, of course, but when he's working, I don't know the exact. He's been associated with Cello, and I'm not sure if has any sort of formal advising with them. I don't necessarily think there is any more that I know of, but his work is cited as as the main inspiration for Cello, and he's done interviews with the founder, like Seb Kamvar, which is a really kind of strange interview if you watch it actually with them. And what Cello is doing is literally creating metrics for how to, as what's valuable in nature. That's the basis of ecosystem services, is defining what nature does through quantitative metrics and then having a financial reward based off of it. And that's what Cello does. That's what natural back capital is you have to measure the nature in order to create the capital. That's the whole thing. So when he's saying that you shouldn't do that, or that it's a limited and problematic mindset because it's financializing things, it is. But that's also kind of the idea that he's supporting and promoting. And then maybe he would be saying that those systems need to take more qualitative information in order to generate the capital, but that still doesn't make that much sense, and it would still meaning making it visible to the machine. There's no such thing as qualitative information in a digital system, because once it's captured as digital, that's quantitative. It has a specific binary code that would show you like pixels on a thing, even if it's like an art project or whatever, something that like you would feel that could inspire you in a way that isn't mathematical. If you're putting that inspiration or that feeling of inspiration into a digital system, then it's quantified information. So it's like I don't really get how he could not see that in a computerized management system of generating currency, because that's what natural back currency is. It's a computer system for creating money based on what they see as being good for nature and for humans.
When I thought he was an advisor or something, I mean, I thought he actually had a more formal connection to Cello. Like,
I'll look it up. I'm not sure.
I was just looking at their website. Like, I know they have, it says Sacred Economics, which that's Charles. Cello's philosophy is grounded in the work of Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics. So, like, someone's got their wires crossed here. Because that Cello's philosophy is exactly opposite of what Charles Eisenstein just stated there about like reducing things to numbers and having it, all be about financial. So they want to just include, different metrics around ecology, that supposedly into the system, but they're not actually getting rid of the core functions.
Yeah, it's like not like I feel like the thing is it's not like if humans are gonna figure out like live on the world and take care of the world, it's basically just people making decisions to do that. Then that's kind of it. It's everything comes down to people's decisions about how they spend their time and energy and focus. So it's like creating this whole sort of big thing in order to direct people's energy and focus and organize it just doesn't really make any sense if you come from the perspective that like people need to make their own decisions in order to want to take care of the things around them, the people around them, and the like life around them. And so just like these whole big ideas about that the system doesn't take into account like love and life as valuable, just like I don't know, seems like misguided.
Yeah, and also I don't know if you caught any of it, but RFK Jr. just spoke at the Bitcoin, the big Bitcoin. Oh, who's kitty? kitty he just like, I guess this was like his first like public speech other than his announcement since his campaign. He chose to do it at the Bitcoin conference. Now I know Bitcoin is different than these things, but it's still on the blockchain and it's still I guess that's a whole nother conversation about Bitcoin. But, it's problematic to me where you see people like Charles Eisenstein or RFK Jr. who present themselves as one thing, yet at the same time, they're promoting these things that are not about liberty, that are not about ecology, that are not environmental, and so that's just the hard time that I'm having here with, people get enamored by something that someone says rather than looking at their associations and their ties. So like Cello is extremely problematic. And
that's the of RFK's speech at the Bitcoin conference. If you listen to it, it's clear like he makes a point to include digital assets and using that language when he's talking about like a lot of the regulation he wants around or doesn't want around Bitcoin, is that he's not framing it as like just Bitcoin.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you're good. He wants to promote this universe of blockchain and digital assets and Web3 is what I got from the way he was talking about things at the Bitcoin conference, which is something a lot of the Bitcoin people would not like about him. I'm sure
Right.
you can find that because it's really like this whole Web3 thing, which is really that's Silicon Valley, that's Davos, that so it's hard to.
Well, it appears there are a lot of indicators that is what they're promoting, even though they don't come out and say it. Like they skirt around it, and they say all this language like, oh, we need to not look at the world through the lens of just numbers, and like they talk kind of like generically, but there are clear signs that this is in fact these systems are in fact what they're ultimately going to support. And so it would be interesting if they were more forthcoming about it and just say, this is what we support. Do you agree with it or not agree with it? But that doesn't seem to be what's happening here. There's, if I can listen to the talks and be like, oh yeah, and I can agree with like 80 or 90% of what's said, and yet it's what's not said. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I wish they would just be honest and like, you're like, all right, here's like, we're just in this crazy situation where we have to use computers and all these hardcore modeling things and whatnot in order to like not be destroyed or not kill ourselves or something. But they don't. They're saying like, they're kind of acting like this is a human-centric and nature-centric approach instead of like just a hardcore military technology paradigm. And like, if that's where we're at, because we're in it, like we're in this hardcore military technology paradigm, and we have been for what seems like, at least 2,000 years or whatever. And I don't know.
And I can never figure out what motivates people. I can't get into their minds or anything, but it kind of blows my mind that, someone who like can sound like they care about the environment, but then go on and promote these things that are clearly, you can see that like market mentality and capitalism, even if you incorporate these other, pull these other things into the capitalist mainframe, that it's not about the environment. You look at like all the technology involved and the sensors involved, and then the human agency that's just basically ground up and thrown into the machine. It's not about that's what the Bitcoin thing was interesting, because it's even Bitcoin itself is not about liberty. It's about liberty for people who have, if you have a lot of Bitcoin, you have just like now you have a lot of money, you have a lot more liberty than someone who doesn't have it. But the idea that this is some sort of great system is it's still even Bitcoin, which is a totally separate thing than the smart contract DAO blockchain type token. It's all
becoming closer.
Huh?
Like a lot of the developments on Bitcoin is making it even closer to like, I'm pretty sure there's new upgrades coming that have, I mean, they've already had some, but that increasingly more like smart contract functionality into Bitcoin.
Oh, really?
Like,
I haven't followed that.
And the Lightning Network is sort of a movement towards that too, in a slightly different way, which is like layer 2 scaling.
And from what I know, then like a lot of the problems with Bitcoin too was the initial thing was, and he even mentioned this in his talk. He's like, you hold your own key, but we know like they've shifted towards, very few people actually hold their own key. There are these third parties that hold the key, and then the whole problems with the Lightning Network, which is kind of an interference within that whole system. So the language doesn't match up with what the reality of the situation is. And so again, like these are politicians, they're politicians and business people, and they're making themselves out to be these purist environmentalists and people that are concerned about human liberty. And that's actually not the case. And it's really irritating because, so many people that have good intentions that really want change, end up falling behind people who actually have other loyalties, I would say. You can't care about the environment and care about, creating a system of market governance that revolves around massive expansion of technology and building like a global computer to manage it all. Like, to me, like those things are totally incompatible. Like, it's totally insane to me. But yeah, it's kind of frustrating. I'll show a couple more clips here that I got, and I know Allison's going to be doing a more in-depth thing on some of this, but I thought I would cover at least some of this.
If any species goes extinct, if any place is ruined, something, even if we don't literally die, something inside of us dies. And it's the valuing of that really escapes economic logic altogether. Like, I think it is maybe a positive step to put a value on ecosystems, to internalize ecological externalities and so forth. But what finite value can you put on creation? I remember reading an article saying,
the stuff that quantify in money, in dollars and cents.
Yeah, if you quantify it, you're already reducing it. So say you value the Amazon, its ecosystem services at $10 trillion. Okay, by that logic, if you could make 20 trillion by cutting it down and turning it into a gigantic pit mine, then you should do it. If you've agreed that it's worth 10 trillion, so we have to have some way some way outside of quantitative logic to make our collective decisions, and not only about environment. It's also true of public health.
So I agree with that. Like, we do need to, step outside of the quantitative logic. The problem is they are literally promoting things that are built in. Like, it's just like, well, let's just build the quantitative logic. Let's just incorporate some sort of metrics to deal with the environment. And that's what Cello is about, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's exactly what they're doing. And it's almost just like, oh, well, we only know how to do quantitative things, so we'll just do that first and then maybe think about making this like prettier later on. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I would want to, I don't know, it just seems like he's skirting that whole issue.
I'm going to do something real quick here. I'm going to make a quick call to Allison and just ask her if she knows if he has a connection, like an official connection with Cello, because that would be good to include. Because I know they have. It's clear there's a connection there.
I mean, I'm pretty sure he's. I don't think he's ever been on the board or.
I thought he was like an advisor, though.
Oh yeah, wait. I think you're right.
Yeah, no, I thought there was like an official thing where he was like. I can't find Allison would. She would be able to tell me like immediately, because I know she's talked about this. Like there was something that was more formal. There was a more formal connection to them. Where he's like on an advisory board or something like that. But maybe they removed him. You know how they can scrub. Reality changes from 1 minute to the next on the internet.
That's true. I have a tweet that says he's an advisor from Cello. So that's
okay. Yeah. Do you want to share that with me, and I'll just put it on screen just to show, like, 'cause I just want to put that out there. Like, we're not just like making a connection that's not there, And it's hard because I know Allison's going hard after this, after the RFK and all this, but I think she's right. It's hard because it's all these other data points. There's all these other things that line up that tell a different story but most people just listen to his speeches or whatever, and they're like, oh, I liked what he said there, and people don't.
She's brought out, really. And like with the children's health defense and that, how little disclosure there is and stuff, because it's like with she's totally right, with nonprofits that have that much money, there really should be annual reports, and for the largest donors and stuff. And if his salary was $400,000, which is like fucking huge for a nonprofit.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a tweet that was put out by Cello on March 22nd of 2020, announcing Charles Eisenstein as an advisor to Cello. So you want to understand what Charles Eisenstein's about. Don't necessarily listen to his talks, but actually look at what Cello is about, because they're their whole model is built on, supposedly built on his writings. And he I don't know if he still is, but he was an official advisor to Stello, and he's on their website as being one of the supposedly intellectual, inspirations for their model. So I think that's one of the challenges is people are too enamored by people's speeches and not actually looking at things like this,
Totally.
Okay, so maybe do a few more, like here, this one's on ecosystem preservation.
Resiliency comes from thriving life. Then the solutions, a whole different set of solutions show themselves, namely to serve the thriving of life everywhere and anywhere that you happen to be. So instead of an abstract global problem of carbon dioxide that lends itself to technocratic solutions in geoengineering and continent-wide biofuels plantations and the mega dams that are destroying African wetlands and gigantic pit mines to mine lithium and cobalt and silver, we can say, okay, let's regenerate the soils. Let's preserve any pristine ecosystem. Let's replant the forests. Let's restore the wetlands. Let's bring beavers back to the waterways of North America to slow down the water and create more life. And that's something that appeals. I think it goes beyond existing partisan ideological divides, which depend on you buying into a politically charged theory of global warming, and allows, like, I know people in the soil restoration movement who they go out to like Midwest farmers and ranchers, and they get them to convert to regenerative agriculture. And they don't once mention climate change, but they mention restoring America's soils. And like these farmers, like they're living on the farm that their great grandfather founded, and the well is dry or it's poisonous, and all of the songbirds are gone, and they see with their own eyes the dying of the land.
So yeah, it's funny. He says, we don't need a technocratic thing, but there's a part of this system that is technocratic. It's just there's also a market attached to it as well. It's like a hybrid system, but it's not. It's still based on data and metrics. It's not what he's saying here. It's not just individual human beings that see a problem that go out and do something about the problem.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I mean,
because you don't need tokens. You don't need tokens for that. I mean, like I said, people
yeah,
need
yeah, you don't need tokens for it, and it lets out that those regenerative agriculture projects, a lot of them say if they're working in part with the USDA or what's called the ESMC, the Ecosystem Services Market Consortium, which is an organization funded out of another organization that was created in the 2014 Farm Bill, and the ESMC is facilitating all sorts of these sorts of projects where targeting traditional corn and soy or other staple crops like that, and to adopt some basic regenerative agriculture practices like crop rotations or targeted different ways of applying fertilizer and doing other things that would, and then measuring the outcome or the data change from doing those things, and then having a reward for that. Partly because they've been going broke because they've been in this, the whole agricultural system. There's so much, corruption and weird things on subsidies and insurance and things like that have been managing agriculture in this country forever, and that's a whole different.
Yeah. But I guess they would argue that we're gonna fix all that, and it's gonna be pure. It's going to be pure markets and without all the corruption and, without the centralized power as it gets is what they're trying to argue.
It's pure markets when you're creating an infrastructure, a market infrastructure that a market's actually just a market for data, and then they're generating data that will make them rewarded in that market system. So it's
Well, the whole idea of a free market is a complete myth. There is no free market of like a whole bunch of agents just just using something as a medium of exchange to facilitate their activity. There's always some sort of central planning involved, even in the design of the token and the issuance of the token, or the in our, as we have now, money itself. Federal Reserve notes are a steering mechanism. There is no, and there never will be, a free market. Like, that's a total, and as far as I'm concerned, that's a total myth, because you have to create these artificial structures, legal structures around money or property or contracts or these other things that have biases for one way or the other. There is no bias free construction of the framework that the markets would then operate within. So like, that whole thing is a total lie. Like, but yet people, so many of my libertarian friends still believe in that. Like, they still believe like, oh, I get my token and then I can do whatever I want with it. It's like, well, before you even got that token, there's all these things that took place, that aided and facilitated in you getting that token to begin with, versus someone else. There were rules to the game. There were rules to the game that led up to you getting that Federal Reserve note or that token or whatever.
Totally.
So
and
yeah,
then, like, this situation, the rules and the incumbents that are creating those rules for who gets the money from ecosystem services, it's like organizations like Cargill and Syngenta and like Nestle and big like you'll see if you go to the ESMC and see their members, it's like Bayer would bought Monsanto and Cargill and like Nestle and McDonald's and like really big and like
well, and then on top of that, there's
oil that he's talking about.
Yeah, and then on top of that, there's like subsidies, there's government subsidies, but there's also subsidies from nonprofits and NGOs and foundations, particularly the foundations. So like, they can inject money and help facilitate and prop up these free markets. So there's so much manipulation on so many different levels here that, so that I know RFK likes to talk a lot about like the free market, and we need to get rid of the crony capitalism. And it's like, all capitalism is crony. What are you talking about? Like, there is no, but yeah, interesting.
Definitely.
So I'll go through a few more of these, and I also have some of your some of the websites that you have too. So we'll just go through quickly. I know we've got maybe 30. Can you do 30 more minutes here?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then I'll edit this down, and then we can do another one later on. So this one, another thing, this one talks about the singular focus on carbon, which I agree with. Like, it shouldn't just be like about carbon. I do think that narrative is not an accurate narrative of what the problem is. Like, I argue with people that are into the whole climate change narrative, which I question. I question a lot of aspects of that. But regardless of that, I know that the things that we're doing are doing really like major damage to our ecological systems, to other like life on Earth, to the animals. So regardless of climate change, regardless of the climate thing, there's a major problem there. And not only that, like, I worked in the cancer center for 4 years, and we see all these neurological. I just watched the documentary that just came out about Michael J. Fox and his Parkinson's, and it's like there's all these neurological diseases, and there's all these things, and those are all, as far as I'm concerned, like, I think that those are almost exclusively environmentally produced through the different harms that like different industry is producing. So like those problems do exist, and so there is a reason for changing, regardless of the climate change narrative. I agree with that. There is a reason to change the way that we do things. It's just I don't agree with what they're promoting, and which they won't tell you. They won't out and out say what it is they're promoting, the solution that they're promoting, which I don't agree with. So, anyways, this next one's about his carbon singular focus.
And very, very polarizing issue in the environmental movement in our country. And you have a different take on it than a lot of other environmentalists. So I just wanted to explore some of your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I want to say, like, at the outset that there's a fundamental truth that is being expressed in the climate change movement and the idea of a climate emergency, which is that what we as human beings do to the planet comes back to affect ourselves. And that is it's a very ancient understanding, but for modern civilization, it's a new understanding that we can't just do with impunity whatever we want to nature and not have it affect our well-being. That said, we tend to frame the problem in familiar, comfortable, reductionistic terms. And this is a much larger pattern in our civilization. You have a problem and you immediately try to find the one cause, the one thing to control or to go to war against. And that becomes a proxy for a much bigger, more complex problem. So this kind of us versus them reductionistic thinking can take the form of what I call carbon reductionism, that reduces the global ecological crisis to one thing that we can measure and technologically control. And as in many other areas of our collective lives, the things that get left out from that singular focus come back to haunt us in the long run. And this is especially true with the global ecosystem. So I'd like to try to expand the conversation to look at, for example, the role of forests and oceans and species and wetlands and so on and so forth, mangroves, seagrass meadows, whales, fish, et cetera, as organs of a living being.
So I on the surface, I agree with, generally agree with what he says, that we need to not reduce this to carbon and look at the bigger thing. But also, like, he's not actually, he promotes, I don't know. Do you want to say something about that?
I feel like what he's sort of not saying is that, so the methodologies and the things that enable carbon credits, which is the satellite imagery, the data collection tools, the sort of standardized bureaucracy with, it's called the DMRV, or the MRV, the monitoring, reporting, and verification processes with carbon credits. That creates the framework for doing it with everything else, for measuring everything else, for the biodiversity, for the soil organic matter, for air quality and other things. Yeah, there you go. So I'm like, obviously the hyper focus on carbon is like pretty irrelevant to the larger, like, health and well-being of living systems. I think everyone would agree with that. I don't think even.
But he's just saying, but he's saying, well, let's just include more things into the metrics.
Yeah, well, that's what he's not like. That's what he's actually saying, but he doesn't outright say it. He said, he kind of says it. He says there's benefits from other things, but he would say that they're more qualitative and can't just be like made into metrics. But what's actually happened is that they're being made into metrics and being used to create financial instruments and being the basis of like the insurance, of a new aspect of the insurance industry, and being a part of global risk simulations and all these sorts of things.
Well, and how do you measure the quality? Yeah, so this is a a report with support from the Cello Foundation, which Charles Eisenstein at least was in at least 2020, unless he stepped down, but he was an advisor to the Cello Foundation. And this is a publication by Collectivo Network and Curve Labs, which was that guy we started out with, Pat Rawson. So yeah, did you want to say anything about this particular
Yeah,
paper?
if we could, I'd say, so like as I just mentioned earlier, the MRV, the monitoring, reporting, and verification methodologies, is for like the legacy carbon credit system. This refers to the kind of bureaucratic processes of actually verifying that like carbon was sequestered in like a specific carbon sequestration project. And historically, that these were, in some like were really manual. So like kind of the story that they give is that in traditional systems, this was only available to really large institutions and really large landowners because of the cost of doing these MRV systems, of like having the people with the technical ability to go in and try to verify these sorts of things, that trees were planted, that they grew a certain amount, and that validates the calculations for how many carbon credits should be issued. And then that's a really costly and time-consuming process. So what they're doing with the MRV, which is becoming highly intertwined with Web3, but is also coming from the like legacy carbon credit industry from institutions like Gold Standard and Vera, is like completely digitalizing and trying to automate that MRV system. And so a lot of Web3 companies are kind of doing that in different sorts of ways. And I'd say like IXO is on this list. So we've talked about IXO with Allison in the past, and as a Web3 project based on verifying impact on like any sort of circumstance. And
through an API, which is like a base layer. It's like a root layer that then like, it's like the root rules that everybody that's on that system has to go by, right? The IXO API, once you commit to that API, and then so like there's a set of rules or protocols that then everything grows out of.
Yeah, I think APIs are like a little bit higher on like, it would be like the interface for accessing the rules and stuff, which would be more like on the blockchain. But
Okay.
I would need the technical stuff for that, or for how that exactly works, is a bit complicated. But I'd say if you went to there's one called the Open Forest Protocol, and I think that's a pretty good example.
Was that this thing? No.
Oh yeah.
Was that
so?
Is this it?
Yeah, that's it. That's the perfect one. They were also on that MRV paper, which is what I meant, but this is
okay.
probably better.
Okay, I can go. I'll jump back to that paper too. So.
Okay, but yeah, so this is a organization based in California, I believe, called Open Forest Protocol, and it's part of what they're doing is making a DMRV system that allows people to report data for the eventually getting carbon credits issued to them based on just like mobile, basically taking pictures of trees and of measurements of like their diameter and things like that. And then they submit that data to like groups of validators, which are like experts that basically are like trying to detect fraud, or like, are these actual claims real, or measurements or whatever. And then they get issued these things. And then this was one of their projects that exists, that's in outside, that the city of Austin is a stakeholder in. So the city of Austin is involved with, I guess some people around and taking the pictures and measuring of these juniper trees, and then putting that into the system to be validated as like true data, and then eventually getting carbon credits for that. It's just, Yeah, and then they're
It's-
calling that open MRV too. So it's like an open monitoring and reporting verification system that anyone could join into that wants to, I guess, make money off of their backyard.
Trying to find where that paper. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, no, it's laughable. I mean, it's painfully laughable. But yeah, but it's interesting. Charles Eisenstein doesn't come out and say that. He doesn't tell you about these things. Like, oh yeah, we want people to take pictures of their tree, and then we're going to have people measure it, and then we're going to have these validators, and then we're going to have all these markets, and then people investing in them.
Yeah, and have these DAOs that appoint validators and all these sort of crazy things.
Okay, so you cannot prove what you cannot measure. You know, looking at some of this thing, measurement, reporting, verification, explained by the World Bank. So do you really trust the World Bank as being an arbiter of what's best for the ecology? You know, people are yeah. Carbon credits, so regenerative. Why regenerative? I'll just scroll through this if there's anything. If there's somewhere somewhere to stop.
The open source. Oh, never mind. Yeah, if you can go to.
I'll just scroll Polygon.
Sure.
And that was another thing. The Polygon just recently got like some major funding. I don't know if you saw that, but like, which bank was it? One of the major banks just put a bunch of money into them, and Google. Anyways, they just got a huge injection as a second layer network. So yeah, you have IXO Foundation. The Open Forest Protocol is actually right here on this list. One Shot Earth, Open Earth. So
Regen.
mm-hmm.
Like I haven't gotten to look into this organization so much, but it was like called the MRV Collective. And there's a lot of, just looking at it, applied genomics, Simplex DNA, Purdue Agriculture, Texas A&M Soil and Crop Science. There's the Israeli University Technicon, which I think is right below. If you scroll down, there we go.
Mm.
Which I think I need to look more into, but Israel Institute of Science and Technology, you can kind of see where that's going. But that like what this stuff that's starting with carbon credits and MRV systems is about a lot more. And then like, why are DNA companies involved in these sorts of systems? It's because of the biodiversity impacts and environmental genomes and those sorts of things. And there's going to be a much larger use case of that idea of what these MRV systems are about. And especially with even anti-GMOs, like verifying that something is not genetically modified means
Right.
going through its DNA and
on
monitoring.
On the children's health defense and the RFK thing that Allison has pointed out, even the wellness, with around like the vaccines, like the system that's being put into place has a place for people that don't want the vaccine, which is like early treatment. So same thing here, like, that's okay. You want your non-GMO, you want your organic thing. Well, we're gonna build a market around that. That's also incorporated into this system with tokens and whatnot. So, yeah, it's not the dialectic between the two sides are not actually seeing what's being advanced here. So then you want to talk about the DMRV, the decentralized measurement, reporting, and verification, as opposed to just the old school.
Oh, I didn't even realize that that's what they're calling it. Well, there's I guess they have big D and little d MRV, which
What's the little
very
d? What's the big
decentralized.
D and what's the
I
little
think
d?
that's digital.
Oh,
Because
digital.
like
Okay.
digital MRV is like what you would see from like Gold Standard and Vera and the World Bank and like what they're doing with carbon credits and stuff is it's just it doesn't. I mean, it involves blockchain too, but they don't call it like decentralized MRV.
Right.
But anyways, like what I think reading the quote here. So in DMRV, trust minimized data collection can be done through a combination of remote sensing, IoT, and human sensing, such as with the smartphone, stored permanently and immutably through current technology such as IPFS and Arweave. When one of these inputs is inaccurate, the other data sources can openly show a dispute. When a dispute arises, stakeholders can confirm or deny the accuracy of the data. In this sense, DMRV is a subset of DMRV. While every DMRV methodology is digitized, not all DMRV is politically decentralized. So what they're talking about is that in the Web3 blockchain versions of DMRV, there's um, governance mediated by smart contracts. So you'd have organizations and people that have a smart contract defined role in the protocol, such as a validator, which would be like some sort of institution or expert with a credential of being able to validate ecological data. And then those people would have the role of either confirming or denying another group's like claim to a carbon credit or something.
Yeah.
And then
Would the Hedera hash graph fit into this? Because I've been looking into like the Hedera hash graph and that like this whole thing about like a lot of it has to do with validating, and they talk about gossip about gossip. They're validating through gossip about gossip. I don't know if you looked into that, but
yeah, I mean, I don't think they're really doing anything that different. I don't know to what extent they have like whole developed smart contracts and things on Hedera, and if like how far along they are or not. But I think from what I understand, it's pretty much just another type of smart contract platform that has a slightly different technological setup than like traditional blockchain, but it'd still be under the category of like distributed ledger technology, and it's just slightly different.
Well, I always look at who their partners are and who their funding are to look at like, okay, who are they going to be like the ones that you really need to pay attention to? And I know Hedera has a lot of really, really high level connections to a lot of the banks and a lot of like the larger institutions around the, global institutions. So, just curious. And also like I've heard people complain about Hedera in terms of how basically it's kind of a very, very controlled private thing. And like, they already have it. They're like, well, yeah, everybody talks trash about it because it basically can be manipulated like the way it's designed right now. You have a handful of people that have like controlling shares of the voting. So people that like say go to Eat Denver, we'll look at things like Hedera or Cardano as, oh, those are the bad ones, and we're the good ones. But, yeah. So the data providers, Google, Astera. So there's people, there's data aggregators, satellite data, Internet of Things data, and then boots on the ground, which I'm curious what that looks like. Real life survey.
That would be like the people with smartphones, I think, like taking pictures and
iNaturalists. Sort of, what are they, nudists?
No, that's the. Do you know that? That's like where they take pics. It's kind of like crazy. It's like a social media. You'll take pictures of plants and stuff, and it'll identify them through AI, and then also crowdsourcing. Right. So yeah, of like any plant, and I think it's gotten pretty advanced. I've had like botanists tell me that they use it a lot, and that
really? Like, okay, yeah, interesting.
That it's like really accurate now. It's actually gotten like pretty far along.
Well, I could see like if you're walking, like, oh, what is that? What kind of plant is that?
Yeah, of course.
Is it kind of like that? Yeah. But people don't think like you're actually like feeding into this bigger thing that you don't even know. This isn't just about you. Well, it's kind of like the CAPTCHA things. And I don't really know how that works, but I'm like, I know I'm feeding, like, they want you to type in the word or whatever, prove you're a human. It's not, those things aren't about proving you're a human. They're actually about them like decoding like photos or whatever that they can't, that the computer can't decode. You're actually doing labor. It's actually labor for the computer. They're just pretending like, oh, we want to make sure you're a person or whatever. I mean, that may be part of it, but
Yeah.
So the Shamda network, data providers, they collect data. And let me know if you want to stop. I'm just going to keep scrolling here.
Yeah, keep going.
Hyphen. This just explains how regrow, what does that say? Smart cloud farming. So yeah, like to farm, you don't need the smart cloud.
Right.
I'll keep scrolling. There's a lot here. You registered the project. And get paid, sell your credits and get paid. So yeah, it's all just a market.
Yeah, I know one of Regen's first like carbon credit sales was to Microsoft. It involved like Australian cattle, but it's like they've been working with Microsoft from the beginning, and Microsoft does all sorts of.
When I think about the environment, I think Microsoft. When I think about protecting.
Think of the Microsoft planetary computer.
That's right. If we just had
that company, Material Solutions, it's like incubated out of Microsoft's planetary computer.
Yeah.
Program.
If we just had more sensors and devices and data and markets.
Oh, is this? Oh, yeah. Wait, sorry. This is the open source protocol
right here.
And I think like if you go up a little bit, this whole part's about them, but
further up.
Yeah, sure. You can go there. Wait, down.
Down. Tell me when to stop.
Down. Now.
Okay.
Cool. So this goes through the process of the measurements and the reporting and the verification. So project operators upload their project area to a dashboard as a KML file and create a digital representation of their project. So digital twin of their area. At first this might not include that much data, but over time it's about getting more and more and more to represent the area. Mm-hmm. Once the land area is uploaded, the dashboard randomly generates an algorithmically defined number of sample plots within each forest area. So that's controlling and telling them where they should take samples in order to have a robust methodology for sampling the trees in the area or whatnot. Then the project operator assigns their field agents who will visit these plots to record the diameter, height, health, and a few other metrics of the trees within each plot. Field agents use OFP's Open Forest Protocol smartphone app to upload their collected data. The Forester app does not require Wi-Fi or reception to collect data. So, as we've been talking about earlier, about some of this is more just a more technological, corporate governance thing. There's all these roles associated with these types of things. So a project operator is the owner or the DAO that's assigned to that land area, and then they assign field agents, the agents, the people, the phones that can go and upload data to their plot, and then they have to get these certain metrics, the height, diameter, health, pictures of the trees and the other info, and then upload it to that. And then the app and the protocol defines how often they have to do this in order to stay compliant. And then, so the information gets uploaded to the dashboard and becomes connected to the blockchain. And then the verification part is done, quote, done by a diverse network of validators with extensive experience in remote sensing, GIS, and forestation data analysis. Validators consist of qualified organizations and individuals who collectively verify field data and additional information. Verification takes less than 60 days and goes through 3 main stages: validation, challenge, and escalation. So that validation, challenge, and escalation is essentially creating the governance or bureaucratic process for how the validators would challenge data that is bad or confirm data that they believe is good. So there's a period of where they just get it and then they review it, and then those parties can challenge it, like quote unquote challenge it, and then there's that triggers other processes with the whole group of validators and how they vote. And basically there's, or I would say it's all under this broad category of like dispute management. And that's like, this is the Oracle system. Like when you're talking about Chainlink and Oracle systems, that's what this is, like controlling what data, the way that data is controlled in order to be put onto the blockchain and validated and like be real. That is what like oracles are all about, and that's what I would say this is, even though they don't use that word.
Yeah. What could go wrong?
And this is like, what could go wrong? And this is what they call like politically decentralized, as like being better than the institutional like private processes for doing this sort of thing. So yeah.
So then they have a process where people can so they validate it, and then they can someone can challenge it.
Yeah.
And are there like some sort of like, I'm curious how that affects the coin. Are there coin trades in the challenge or anything like that? Have they have they monetized the challenge as well?
Yeah, exactly. So like what with the Oracle systems, generally from most of the things I've seen, the validators have to put in a stake, like a stake of usually like the network token, in order to become a validator. And then they earn fees based off doing the validation work. And they would likely lose so it's all gamified. So they like
gambling. Yeah.
I need to look at these specifics, but they would lose money if they approved a data set that was eventually challenged by the other validators and was seen to be like unfit to the protocol. Then they would like lose part of their stake and be penalized and that sort of thing.
And we all know,
and then likely
if you gamify something, that keeps everybody honest and on the up and up.
Right. And yeah, so I just thought this was like overall like a decent example of like how these things are happening in the Web3 systems and the type of like what's going on in how blockchain carbon credits actually happen and what sort of ideas are being implemented.
Oh, so here's a
and how it's a part of essentially larger cybernetic global hive mind.
Yeah.
We don't really think about that part.
Sign me up. I'm going to go get my tape measure and go out and start measuring some trees for money.
Yeah.
Open Earth. Open source digital systems. So this is just one of the organizations. You got your drone, you got your flotation devices, your little sailboats. I guess people
right.
It's just everything. Once you start to put all these different pieces together, a vision of the world, a nightmare vision of the world starts to appear, of just like sensor surveillance everywhere. But it's not Klaus Schwab. All right. I mean, yeah, he plays his role, but like nobody's looking at any of this other stuff, which is kind of amazing to me. We've talked about the IXO protocol. a blockchain-based web of trust through which to deliver, verify, and invest in impacts. IXO is built using the Cosmos SDK. And so Allison turned me on to the IXO Foundation in terms of the impact finance deals around education and other areas as well. So they're an important prediction oracle.
Yeah, and Cosmos too is important. And one of the, I believe, yeah. So in the BIS Genesis 2.0 project is one of their blockchain systems for all this carbon credit stuff. And one of the pilots, even though it's like a private blockchain, is built on the Cosmos SDK. So meaning it will be able to interoperate with all the other blockchains built on the Cosmos SDK and the other things. So this like dichotomy between the institutions making their like private blockchain systems and the like public networks doing their own thing is like both made up and not representative of the reality that those systems are all going to be interoperable and already are to some degree. And yeah, so it's just a thing that's made up in order to get people to get stuck in one little thing without seeing the like larger net of what's being applied. And like,
yeah, and even just I keep coming back to this, but just the underlying faith that people have as in money and markets, and you know, when I say money, I'm also including tokens and whatnot, but just that there's a fundamentalist belief in markets as being some sort of like meritocratic, you know, if you just had if you just balanced it out, if you just had the equilibrium, you know, if you just had the governance systems built just in the right way, it would all work out. And I think that foundational belief itself needs to be challenged. And not in the traditional, then you're either, you know, a communist or you're a capitalist or you're a socialist or whatever. Like, forget about all those categories or whatever. Let's just talk about the issues and the problems associated with some of these things. You don't have to like mean that you're supporting some other bullshit system that's been promoted out there either. You can criticize these things without having to adopt this other thing, you know, like it's kind of crazy that we can't have these conversations. Do you know anything about this Nori carbon registry marketplace?
No, I don't.
Looked into
I
that one?
Yeah, that seems, I may have seen the name before, but I don't really. Yeah, that is actually kind of interesting in that they're associated with the USDA, which is.
And nori is a seaweed, right? Nori is a type of it's like a seaweed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
It's actually one of the only places I think you can get like natural B12. Like usually you get like, I think you get B12 from meat, you know, like, but there's not very many plants that you can get B12 from. But so I was buying nori just for that.
But just reading that, like that sort of thing would be really important for. So what they're talking about is the system for measuring soil organic carbon. So basically like the amount of organic carbon in the soil, which would be really important for the more agricultural focused use cases of ecosystem services and that sort of thing, and the like larger scale modeling of agriculture. And like the part of the reason I focus so much on the insurance side of it is because the insurance companies and agencies are the ones, like when it comes down to it, basically defining best practices and like what's insurable and what's not insurable and what sort of things farmers need to do in order to like fall under their criteria, and that they are willing to incentivize things that, like, all of this is about incentivizing things that they say is basically reduces risk that the crops would be wiped out or something like that.
Yeah, the insurance piece is fascinating because even going back to the market, the free market or whatever, just like subsidies, the insurance is another way that just like creates a safety net. And so the whole idea, that the concept that people have around a market is like you would invest in something and there's some sort of risk involved. And so like, you know, maybe you don't want to make that investment because you might lose your money. But then there are these things behind the scenes where certain players, like they're going to win no matter what. Like there are certain players in this thing that will win out. Like if you know how to play the game right, through, you know, subsidies, insurance, there were all these secondary, and then even like shorting. So it's this real complicated, ridiculous game that has nothing to do with what people think is how the world works. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, definitely.
So cropping sequence, gain forest, open platform that empowers. So that's his gain foresting is monitoring and auditing, decentralized payments, stakeholder engagement, user focused token incentives. Wildlife camera traps. Yep, we just need cameras all over the place. Okay, I'll just I guess well, is that okay? Well, we'll go on from there. I'll just go to flow carbon. And if you want to skip over this, I know it's been a while, but like, let me just show you what I have up here. I have this BIS smart contract based. Do you want to say something about this one?
Maybe we should save it because it's sort
for another.
of, I mean,
yeah, that's a whole conversation. That's maybe a longer conversation.
This one, I mean, I could just quickly say that the Climate Action Data Trust is an initiative built from the World Bank. Sorry, it's the other one, not the BIS one. They're separate from what I can tell. This one, yeah.
Okay.
Just for something that to be on people's radar, because it's not like a pilot or anything. Like it actually is. It exists.
So you want to just start that over? Like I just brought this up on the screen. Just start your for editing purposes.
The Climate Action Data Trust, and this is a project associated with the World Bank for basically. They almost make it kind of unclear, especially in this specific article, but it's like a kind of like a metadata system for organizing information from all the different national registries for carbon credits. And this is also built with Gold Standard and Vera, which I've mentioned earlier, but probably the two largest institutions for like verifying carbon credits. And so, this is a blockchain-based system for like global monitoring and of carbon credits, and it's live and people are using it. And they say in the article, I think it's Bhutan. Maybe could go find it, but
here,
that
I can
has already settled millions of dollars using the platform, and so it's just like a thing that's like they're doing it. It's being done. It's and this has nothing to do with CBDCs, like they would use it eventually, but it's like I haven't seen anyone really talk about this, but it's blockchain and it's fulfilling the stuff that we're talking about in a way that people aren't really quite aware of.
Well, it's everybody's going on and on about CBDCs, but nobody's talking about smart contracts and DAOs, which is also programmable money.
It's the wider. Right there. It was right up. Sorry, it was right up there. Next page up.
Oh, sorry. Here.
There we go. So their collaboration will help set the specifications for an open source metadata system that can share information about carbon credits and projects across various digital platforms. This is to ease the future integration of multiple registry systems and make it easier for companies and countries to share data. For instance, the new credit carbon platform will allow Bhutan to save around $1 million in market access costs. One Bhutan Ministry of Economic Affairs officer said that really helps us leapfrog the entire learning process. So like with a lot of these World Bank, or with this one specifically, it's about standardizing the systems that like smaller countries would need in order to engage in like the carbon credit market and do this sort of thing. So that, I mean, that's what they're really doing. They're just trying to make it as easy as possible, and in some instances forcing them, because for a lot of these countries they're doing what's called like debt for nature swaps.
Yeah,
So countries that are in debt, like the World Bank and other things, the or the IMF or whatever, will forgive debt in order for the country to do like nature-based solutions, or like work in the carbon markets and like these sorts of things, or build green technologies and whatnot. So it's like part of the way, kind of people have talked about how obviously how the world of how this sort of debt, these debt systems are used to perpetuate empire and colonialism and stuff. But this is kind of how that's happening right now, and making them get onto these sort of trans global digital infrastructures.
well, and that's been going on since World War One. Who knows how long? I don't know how long this sort of thing's been going on. But the whole idea of putting everyone in debt in order to the point isn't to pay you back the money. The point is to make you dependent. I remember years ago, like it was at least a decade ago, but Bono of U2 was going around and really, pushing for debt, giving these, fiery speeches about all the debt. These poor countries are put in debt and we need to cancel the debt. Of course, he's in bed with, the World Bank and all these people that have put these people in debt. And he was painting himself as being the advocate of them. But these debt cancellation programs were the same thing. It was about like okay, we'll cancel your debt if you do this, 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 and this, and this, which I think was the point of the debt in the first place. Like they know that these countries aren't going to be able to, they encourage wasteful spending. They encourage corruption. They encourage the borrowing to begin with, which is that the whole thing is controlled. When you can issue the money and retract the money, and you can raise the interest rates and lower the interest rates, the whole thing can be managed. And so it's kind of a joke. That was the whole point of the debt, was to steer people into these programs to begin with.